So I dreamt about being a director since I was a kid, and I saw Lord of the Rings, and I saw like Peter Jackson
Ah,
standing in the mud with the orcs, and I was like, I want to be him. And then my mom was like, you can't do that. You have to get a real job. And so I did. I became a nurse, and
cool.
that's yeah. And I started in emergency healthcare, and I soon found out that's a hard job, and you need to be passionate about it because you sacrifice a lot. And I was like, this is not my passion. If I'm gonna sacrifice, then I need to do what I need to do.
Something you
And so
love,
I,
right?
yeah. And then I started art school, and then eventually it was like I couldn't just paint anymore. I just started to do performances, and then started filming.
Good evening, filmmaker Camilla Jämting of the film Project Dad. Camilla, how are you this evening?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm glad being here.
I'm glad you're here. Project Dad is no other film I've ever seen. I'm sure you've heard that before, but the film pushes boundaries. It goes places most films wouldn't go. Do you know why you had the courage and bravery to do that? Where does that come from?
I felt like I had to do it. I had this relationship with my dad has been like a complicated relationship throughout my whole life, and I realized that I was starting making like all these kinds of different art pieces, all coming back to understanding my dad and our
Right.
relationship. And then when I decided to make this film, I was like, but this is it. I'm not gonna do it one more time. So then I just went 100%.
Do you think it comes from having a dad like that who's so the film covers your relationship with your father who's like a dating influencer. Do you think like part of the reason why it was successful was because he's out in the open with his life as well? If he was a more shy individual, it might be harder for you to make the film that you wanted to make.
Yeah, the reason I did it with my dad and not some other difficult relationship in my life, it's definitely because we have that. We have it in common that we are both like extrovert and kind of like to push things and be a little bit provoking. But I also had to step up my game to like level with my dad.
That's so true. So the film is showcasing at Slamdance in the next week. So when people turn on to watch Project Dad, what should they expect to see?
Like when it like comes down to the core of the film, it's really me trying to understand the relationship with my dad, and I'm really doing everything I can to succeed with that task. And as you said, my dad is this kind of Tinder expert helping men to succeed with their online dating.
Cool.
And I'm a feminist, and a lot of themes that we like we have like we have a common interest, but we just know the opposite facts from one another. Like he can argue like the wage gap could be something like because men are more like show off. I don't
Right.
know, and I could argue like something completely different, and we are very short like in our opinions that I'm right and he knows that he's right. And so we try to meet. I try to meet him. And yeah, it's a lot happening. It's intense, an intense film.
It is, and you include those little moments where there are comments from your dad's friends on like gender and things like that. And notice that that's the beauty of your film is that there's so many of these little moments that if you're watching closely, you'll see and you'll pick up that you're showcasing commentary on gender stereotypes and women in the workplace. And it's such a encompassing film. I enjoyed watching it so much. Do you was it the film that you expected it to be? Like when you started the process of filming with your father, did you expect it to be such a boundary pushing film?
Yeah, when I started, I had this vision in my head. I never, this is the first film I've ever made. So I didn't know how to achieve that. So of course I was like, maybe it won't be as much and as like wild, but that was really my intention. And even from the beginning, I had this idea that I would add some animations because I know I have like a lot of me is in my drawings and in my art, and I
Right.
really wanted to engage that to just make sure that this was a portrait that like balanced from both of us, but like still it comes from me.
And Camilla, how did you get involved in filmmaking? That came from your dad as well, or what made you decide to pick up a camera?
So I dreamt about being a director since I was a kid, and I saw Lord of the Rings, and I saw like Peter Jackson
Ah.
standing in the mud with the orcs, and I was like, I want to be him. And then my mom was like, you can't do that. You have to get a real job. And so I did. I became a nurse, and
Cool.
that's yeah. And I started in emergency healthcare, and I soon found out that's a hard job, and you need to be passionate about it because you sacrifice a lot. And I was like, this is not my passion. If I'm gonna sacrifice, then I need to do what I need to do.
Something you
And so
love,
I,
right?
yeah. And then I started art school, and then eventually it was like I couldn't just paint anymore. I just started to do performances, and then started filming.
Do you feel like Project Dad is a Swedish film? I know that obviously by nature of being Swede, it's a Swedish film. But what I mean is, would a Swedish person watch that and see like what they would consider like Swedish qualities as part of it? And then is there like a sort of like streamline or type of film that what you would consider like a Swedish film?
Yeah, I had a comment that this is very typical Swedish, and that was a
Okay.
Danish guy who said that.
He might know. Yeah.
Yeah, and he talked about the sense of humor, and I guess
Right.
that our sense of humor is it's funny because it's true. It's the awkwardness in not understanding each other and like miscommunicating, and
Right.
I think that's a part of like Swedish film history. If you look at the classic film Together, with about like a hippie collect they live in together in a house. And yeah, and that's so many of those like raw, this is how it is, but it's so absurd kind of humor. And I think it's probably the example that like really pushed that kind of humor. So could be, but also me and dad, we are not like typical Swedes. Swedes are known to be a little bit introvert and very nice,
Right.
polite, and we are not that. We don't come across as that in the film. So it's interesting, but I'm not sure.
It's hard for you to make that analysis. It's like saying, is this an American film? How do you
Yeah.
know? Because it's something that you grew up with. It's just, it's your personal story. That doesn't make it one thing or another. It's basically decided by other people on how they view that, not necessarily you. Awesome. The other thing that really stood out to me is when you mentioned this earlier, you define yourself as a feminist. What did that mean to the film? Can you help somebody understand like how that changed your film? And then compare that maybe to somebody who doesn't classify themselves as a feminist. How do you think they would have shot this? Do you think like you wouldn't have had those little lingering scenes on the wage gap and women's role in society, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I think the way I see it, my character in the film, myself, have two issues with that. And the first issue is like he doesn't listen and fully respect me as his child, the way I would wish my father would look at me as a child. And the other thing is he doesn't view me and respect me the way I would like as a woman. And I think that's interesting because I have the two different struggles in the film. And as a feminist, of course, I have that perspective with me
Right.
throughout the entire film. So I think that there's this key scene, spoiler in the end, when we talk about our relationship and I get through to him. I think he does understand me from the perspective of being his kid. But I don't think I ever really make him understand me as a woman. I think that's still the part that didn't come through completely. And would it have been a film made by a non-feminist,
Right.
then
It's
it
hard
would
for,
only
yeah.
have been that the perspective of a
Right.
father and a child. And that's also interesting, and there's a lot to dig in. But there's so many layers that wouldn't be there. As you
Right.
mentioned, these small conversations we have. And like for one example, I talk about an abuse that I've been a victim of. And my dad is just going into this very stereotypical mode of being like, but maybe he didn't understand. Maybe he thought that you wanted this. And that would have been like, from a non feminist perspective, that could have easily been like, yeah, could be the case, because that's a lot of society views victim of assaults. That,
Right.
yeah, they just misinterpreted the situation and they weren't clear in the communication. And that's like very common. So I'm like, in my feminist view, I'm like, yeah, I hear you. I know a lot of people think like this, but it's so absurd and it's not right. And I wanted to show that perspective.
That is such a powerful answer, and that recaps the film brilliantly. I think like when people go down to sit down to watch the film, it's so hard to make a short film that has so many layers in it. That must have been a challenge of getting all the footage and then somehow editing it down to where you're able to cover those two things that you wanted to cover. That must have been a big challenge.
Yeah, it was a lot of time in the editing room, and we had
Mm.
a lot of material. We had 40 hours, and
Wow.
yeah, it's 28 minutes now, and then I've even added more material afterwards.
And it could not have been shorter. I know sometimes people think, oh, you could have edited, but there's not a single scene in there that I think thought was wasteful. Like it always pushed towards what you talked about, the twin stories there, and it's just phenomenal short film. So you're showing it at Slamdance. Why Slamdance? Was there any specific reason why you submitted to that festival? Did it represent the kind of filmmaker that you are?
Yeah, definitely. Slamdance is known for trying to find the independent filmmakers who wants to just have their own voice and just
Right.
make their own thing. And that's also for like first time filmmakers or people in the early stage of their career. So I think it's just, yeah, now when I'm in, I'm like, oh my god, I'm in the right place. This film couldn't have been in a better place. So
That's
that's, yeah.
fantastic. And
Yeah.
so if somebody wants to watch Project Dad over the next year, is it still going to festivals? Do you have a timeline of when there might be distribution? What are your thoughts on like short films and distribution generally?
Oh, no, it's
Tough question, I know.
still in the festival run. I'm surprised because Slamdance came like a year after I started launching it, and it's been going really well in Scandinavia, a little bit
That's
throughout
awesome.
Europe. Yeah, but now I'm thinking maybe a North American run is up next. Yeah, I hope so. And so there will be starting to be like some, vad heter det? Losing my words. Streaming
Yeah.
availabilities in Scandinavia soon this year, but I guess North America has to wait a little longer.
And maybe we could partner with Tinder and have like screenings. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, how?
No, I don't know how, but I think it would be cool. I think it would be like a good way to have this debate, right? Like
True.
a lot of people view Tinder like as a hookup app, right? And there's not
Mm,
really like a lot of like feminist thought associated with that. So to be able to
true.
have that, I don't know if Tinder wants to have this discussion,
Maybe not.
but I think like having that discussion of people that are using the app and then what the consequences are, what's the life behind people like your father, that type of thing, people who
Mm.
are on the app. I think that's just like a fantastic conversation to have. Do you find that like after screenings and that you're doing the Q&A that some of these issues come up that people talk with you about sort of feminism and the issues that you raise in the film?
Yeah, definitely. The most common comment I get is from like women in my age or younger who's, oh, I can relate. I can relate. And they say, my dad isn't quite as your dad, but we still have issues. But
I don't
there's also been like men who has approached me and they have been more like identified with dad. And there's this one old man, like older, and he came to
hope he's
me and
not
he
listening.
said, he was super old, probably the oldest man I've ever met. And he came to me and he said that he chose loneliness and he saw dad as a lonely person who was like going his own path. And he was like, I always did that and I chose it and I lost other things, but I had to be myself and blah, blah, blah. And it was
Right.
really touching. And yeah.
Camilla, if somebody is watching this at Slam Dance and they think, oh man, I want to watch more films from you, I want to see more of her work, what does the future look like? Do you have more works in the pipeline if somebody wants to go watch like a Vimeo or other films that you have? Can people find that?
Yes, soon. Anyway, so there's one very exciting project that I'm involved in. That it's a company in Sweden who has optioned the rights to make Project Dad into a reality series.
What? Really?
Yeah, yes. So they are looking into talking to different distributors and yeah, anyway, producers how to make this become the reality series of our dreams. With the, it's not me and Dad. We are just like the prototype, the
Right.
original. But there are other daughters and their dads, and
Oh,
I would be a part as an executive producer. So that's going on. And me as a director, I am about to launch my bachelor film that I made when
okay.
I graduated from film school. It's the
Yay.
shorts, yes. And I am starting to write my first feature.
Okay, fantastic. And people can find you on Instagram
Yes,
or yeah, I'll make sure to link that in the show notes. So,
perfect.
Camilla, this is an indie film podcast. Love hyping other people's projects. Two-part question here. Is there a film specifically at Slamdance that you're excited to see, other than your film, of course? And secondly, is there an indie film or filmmaker just generally that you wish more people knew about?
Okay, so in Slamdance, I'm screening together with my Omaha. And
Yeah.
yeah, and you talked to Nick.
Nick told me how much he loved Project Dad and how thrilled he was that you're screening with him.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same, and I was so happy when I saw. Actually, we already showed each other the films, but anyway, I'm excited to see my Omaha in this like,
Theater.
cinema and also in the U.S. because yeah, I can't imagine how difficult topic like he's working on with the segregation and his father who was like a Trump supporter and in the middle of all this trying to figure out his path in the society he lives in his family. And so we have such a similar process and we're just from different parts of the world and now we're meeting with our daddy issue films. And I'm so excited to meet him and to see his film. And it was really good.
It's so good. Yeah.
It's so good. It really makes you think and it makes you reflect and yeah. So it's definitely Slam Dance must see.
I love that.
Um, yeah.
And then
And,
Camilla, a
and
film,
yeah.
yeah, that maybe you knew and you love and you talk about, but maybe you wish more people knew about.
I don't know. This is a hard one because I feel like the films I love, like people know about them, but that's just because I'm
Right.
around filmmakers. But I really think everybody needs to see Tony Erdmann by Maren Ade. Have you seen it?
I've not.
It's a German film, and it's that this is like my biggest inspiration to Project Dad. This is a fiction, but it's fantastic. It's Tony Erdmann. Yeah, so that's
Fantastic.
definitely my tip.
Camilla Jämting, the film is Project Dad. It's screening at Slamdance. You're a phenomenal filmmaker, phenomenal gift to independent film, and you're telling stories that I think are going to resonate with a lot of people, especially Project Dad. And I am cheering for your continued success, and I'm looking forward to what's next. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. So exciting.